Hello, everyone, and welcome to another LinkedIn Live. I'm Simon. I'll be your host for today's session on Sales Cloud implementation success. As always, a huge thank you to all of you for tuning in today. While we wait for a couple of people to join and get settled, do let us know where you're tuning in from in the comments. I'm based in London myself, and I'm actually in the Salesforce Ben office today, hence the lovely plants in the background. But yes, today's topic, as I'm sure we're all aware, is of huge transformative potential that Salesforce can bring when it's implemented effectively, such as improving the efficacy of business processes, optimizing your workflows, and elevating customer satisfaction. But of course, that potential can only be reached through applying strategies to get the most out of your implementations and to help you avoid some of the common mistakes and pitfalls that could arise. So that being said, by the end of this session, you should leave with some actionable insights and strategies to tap into that transformative potential and take your Salesforce implementations to the next level by making them work harder for you and also your organization's goals. Just going to pop on the screen the slides just to cover some housekeeping. But essentially, the lines will be muted for sound quality. Do submit your questions in the comments. And of course, the webinar is being recorded and it will be shared after the session. You are also in the best of hands because this session will be led by Kerry Townsend, who is a principal consultant at Amber Star Consulting and a seasoned Salesforce professional with over 15 years of experience. She is also the author of Salesforce Sales Cloud, the author of Salesforce Sales Cloud and Implementation Handbook. So there will be plenty to learn over the next hour from her experience and knowledge with implementations. So with that, I will hand over to Kerry to kickstart her session.
Wonderful. Thank you. And thank you everyone for joining me today for this session about Sales Cloud and some of the learnings that I've taken over a number of the years. So first of all, a little bit about me. So as Seema said, I've been working with Salesforce for over 15 years, and that includes working on Sales Cloud, Service Cloud, and Marketing Cloud. And over that time, I've amassed 16 certifications, which includes the Sales Cloud Consultant certification. I've also been lucky enough or worked in the community for long enough to be awarded the MVP award. And because I managed to or kept that up for 5 years plus, then I've also made it into the Hall of Fame, which is something I'm really quite proud of. And one of the reasons and the ways that I was awarded that was because I'm a London calling community group leader. I'm also the Marketing Cloud group leader for London, along with my colleague Jimson Lee. And I've also been involved with Salesforce, if any of you have heard about that. But generally, I've been active in the community for a number of years and have benefited widely from being able to work with lots of people and meet lots of people in there, and then also like to present and create resources which also help others within the community who are learning. So in terms of my career, I started out as a solo and accidental admin. So I worked at an end user who implemented Salesforce, specifically Sales Cloud, Service Cloud, and the marketing element of the core platform at the time. And then through that, I saw the power or the potential of the platform in that organization, asked to be the admin, and that's really where I started my career. So I then moved into consultancy when we got to a point where that organization were really at the limit of how they were going to use Salesforce, and then started in boutique consultancies, so really small organizations working with SME customers and working as effectively a solo consultant, so responsible for everything, and then moving into a larger boutique consultancy, so Cloud Sherpas, if any of you have heard of them. And then that was acquired by Accenture, which meant that I then made it through the full spectrum of consultings, really, in terms of sizes and working on much larger projects. So I have a breadth of experience. I've seen lots of different things, some really wonderful things, also some lessons that I've probably learned the hard way, or things that I can now look back over a varied number of projects and go, okay, what sort of themes were there? Where were there pain points? All of that sort of thing. And that's really what I would like to share with you in the next 30 minutes or so that we have together. So I'll start out with some actual personal reflections and learnings, right? So within this, I think a key thing for me, which is something that I didn't really appreciate when I was starting my career, is that there's actually no perfect solution. And that's still sometimes, there's always a trade-off. And sometimes I always wish that there was a perfect solution, and rather than, the various different options depending on what is most appropriate for the business. So in most cases, that phrase that often comes up is that perfect is the enemy of the good. So that in sometimes when you're seeking a perfect solution or something that really fits for everything, it holds you from making progress. So in most cases, it's about finding a good solution that is appropriate for the situation that you're actually in. And that's something that I definitely didn't appreciate when I was just starting on the platform and wanted to solve every problem with Salesforce, which again comes on to my second point, is it's not always the solution for every problem. And although Salesforce does provide a far wider breadth of solutions now, sometimes it is appropriate to use a different tool, or effectively use a tool where people are, or assess the landscape and what's available within an organization to see and understand all the applications that are available, and then try to use one of those first, because that makes the best use of the IT spend that's already been made. But then if that doesn't work, then obviously there are benefits for bringing everything onto the Salesforce platform. Another thing that I obviously have become very aware of over my career is it's also important to be aware of the things that you don't know. So there's lots of things that you can learn with Salesforce about features and all of those things, but it's good to have an awareness of the things that you're not that familiar with, not an expert in, and where you can go and get additional information or advice or guidance from within your organization or externally in the community. So I remember as part of my career, I would learn things about the Salesforce platform, but then I think my knowledge really expanded when I worked in more of a boutique consulting setting or an enterprise consulting setting around all the different tools and things that go on around an implementation. So that might be DevOps, it might be types of testing, it might be types of training and how you approach change management, all of those pieces. So if you're starting out working individually, you might not have exposure to those. So it's really useful to understand that those aspects are out there and that you can go and learn those, and that there are various resources in order to do that. And also a big lesson that I try to share as often as I can is that Salesforce has enabled me a really quite varied career, and I've found myself doing things that I never thought that I would. So along with working with different organizations and implementing Salesforce, it's also meant that I've been able to get involved in organizing a community conference, and I work with a great team of people, and we put on London's Calling every year, which will be coming up to the 9th year now, actually, which is happening next week. And it's based in London, and it's given me an insight into organizing an event. We bring together lots of speakers. So it's an amazing thing, an additional skill and knowledge that I've gained. And now, most recently, I've also had the opportunity to be an author, which is something there. I've always admired people that have done that, and always thought that it would be great to be able to say that and have reached that achievement, but never actually thought that I would. And I was approached to do that, and I'm just really grateful that I've had that opportunity. So the book that I've recently released is Sales Cloud, an Implementation Handbook. And as part of that, it's got me thinking about the implementations that I've been involved in, all the various things regarding that, some of the pitfalls, some of the things to look out for, and bringing that together. So I've created that resource, which I'm really quite proud of. And in this session, I'm going to go through some of the learnings that I found along the way, which hopefully will help other people. So if we start by coming onto my first point here, which is having a consistent focus on people. Now, this sounds really obvious, but once you get into maybe doing a piece of work, whether it's a full implementation or you're bringing on some new functionality within an environment that's already set up, or you're bringing in another business unit, it can be, obviously the initial part is very much about understanding what the people need and gathering requirements and documenting those. But once you move into the sort of build phase and into further phases of the project, it can be very easy for the focus to then switch to, how many tasks are completed, where are we on the timeline, how much is the cost, where are we meeting our timelines? And sometimes it's possible that the focus moves away from users and more to actually just getting to an endpoint. And so I think it's always important to bring the attention back to the people that you're building the system for. And fundamentally, that's important. And the why for that is because you don't really have success without adoption. And although there are obviously situations where you can craft a great technical solution and be very proud of maybe the new functionality that you've used or something along those lines, but in some cases, it's just the simple things that make a user's life better. And if the system is difficult to use, then obviously people don't adopt and there is resistance. So some signs that that's perhaps happening or causes for that are when maybe the people that are building the solution aren't actually particularly close to the users. So what can happen, particularly in larger projects and situations, is that the people who are building the solution have either never met the people that will actually be using it, they don't work in the same location, they might not even be sort of in the same time zone, or have any real functional experience that relates to the piece of functionality that they're building, and that can cause sort of a real disconnect. Another reason is timelines. So obviously we all know that things need to keep on time, and there is a financial cost for them not keeping on time. But it can mean that things like playbacks or seeking additional user feedback are the things that get left out, or the things that need to be cut out. Another reason can be from more of the business side, that the people that you're building for don't actually have the time to engage, or it's very much the people that are engaged in the project are very much more at the management level and not the user level. So although obviously the requirements and all the information that you're getting is very valid, it's not you're not hearing it from the people that are actually delivering on the ground day in, day out, and hearing their pain points directly. So what can you do in practice to help with that and support that? So I encourage anybody that if you're working on a project like this, if you can get to ask the end users directly, so a small subset of them, and even better, if you can sit with them at their desks and watch what they're doing and ask further probing questions, clarify your understanding, play back, describe how something might work, and get one-to-one feedback on whether that is useful or not, that is a really essential and really powerful way of transferring that information from the functional users through to the people that are actually designing and building the solution. Good quality user stories. So that's a user story with acceptance criteria that picks both the positive and negative cases that you're trying to build for. Regular playbacks. So sometimes there can be, there are questions about why you might do so many of these, but the feedback that you get early means that you can make changes once it's effectively much easier to make and also much cheaper to make within your development. So the more changes you can And the differences you can understand early, the better. Understand how and where people need to use the system. So we're talking about Sales Cloud, which means that typically people might either be they're regularly on the phone and they're working through high volumes of records and contacting large numbers of people, or they might be more field based, which means that they're out about. So that means that they might be on a laptop, they may or may not have access to a second screen, or be in the office with significant Wi-Fi. They might need to be able to fill information in when they're on the move, and therefore they might need the mobile device. So you might want to consider the form factor there. So being aware of where people are and those specific requirements allows you to keep a strong focus on specifically what they need. So I have to say this isn't specifically something that I've done in projects, but I have been thinking about it more recently. So in marketing, you would create, say, a persona, and you'd have a number of personas which look to capture the characteristics and the motivations and the needs of specific customers that an organization might want to be communicating with. And I actually think that that process and that focus may actually also be very valuable in an implementation setting, particularly if you have people who are building and configuring or coding who are not as close to the user, or for various reasons that it isn't that easy to make those connections and have that regular contact. Then actually having a persona, giving the various users a name, allowing people who are building and designing the solution to really understand what motivates that person and their needs and their motivations, I think could be very, very powerful. So my next key takeaway really is about terminology. So again, these are all the things that I've listed here are learnings that I've taken more from the Sales Cloud projects that I've been on. And although most of the tips that I provided here actually are transferable to other clouds, for me, I've seen these as really sort of prominent themes within the Sales Cloud implementations I've been part of. So terminology and what we associate the meaning with different words all comes from our frame of reference. And I've particularly found when it comes to the terms that are used in Sales Cloud, that different stakeholder groups interpret those and associate different meaning with them. So within sales and marketing, I have on a number of different occasions seen that these sort of differences in terminology can arise, and that actually it can produce potentially even internal conflict or disagreement, misalignment, maybe just a little bit of friction, because everybody is using the same term, but they have a different expectation of what it means and what will happen from that. So some key terms that I've pulled out here are the word lead, opportunity, prospect, campaign. So all of these words can be interpreted differently. And if for each organization that you work with, you would find that they have actually a slightly different definition of what these mean. And one of the ways that this is both good and challenging is that these are all terms that you would see within Sales Cloud. And that means that as someone who knows Sales Cloud and goes in and talks to an organization, you can be using those terms and you'd be thinking about them in terms of the system and what that means for that, which effectively in the three cases that I've pulled up here, say lead, opportunity, and campaign, they all really just mean a tab in the system. But for a organization point of view, they might be using these words for a very specific meaning, and that they are at various stages in a sales cycle, or that they have various attributes related to them that might be slightly different from what you were going into the organization, and even what people within the organization associate with. So why is this important? It can create sort of unnecessary tension, and sometimes in some organizations there can be a little bit of friction, or a little bit of disagreement or push and pull between a sales and marketing team. And quite often, an organization might implement a tool like Salesforce to provide greater visibility, hoping that it will fix maybe that slight friction or misunderstanding. And actually, that's more of a sort of process terminology problem within the organization rather than a technology problem. And in that circumstance, you're trying to use technology to fix a person or people problem. So, yeah, these are some of the causes and the signs that you can look for. So, a disconnect within teams, if you go into an organization or even work within your own organization, you'll very quickly start to understand if there is a slight push and pull between various functions within the organization. It can mean that they're not meeting their goals. So, for example, marketing might believe that they've created so many leads, and they've handed them over to the sales team, but the sales team aren't able to convert those and actually make use of them, or they think that they're low quality, and there's some conflict between how the sales and marketing team are working together and the definition of that. And again, with that, it's sometimes where you can see that the technology is being brought in to try and solve this visibility problem, but actually there's a people and process element that also needs to be resolved as well in order for even the technology to be successful. So in practice, how can you work to help improve this or understand this? So always be listening for sort of misunderstanding and a difference in interpretation. And I mean, I would say that I would be focusing on trying to do this all the time, because we use lots of words that can be interpreted like implementation or training. And although we all have an understanding of what they might mean to us, for another stakeholder in a business or another colleague, they might mean something slightly different. They just might, that the extent or the volume that is involved in each of those might also be different. So training to one person might be, in-person training session. Training to another person might be bite-sized snippets of training that they can take on demand. It can mean different things to different people. Try as often as possible to play back your understanding. So, when you're working with business stakeholders, it might be going, okay, so I understand that you use this term in the organization. Can I just clarify that this is my understanding of what it means? Is that also yours? Is there anything I've missed here? How might that, do you think that differs within a different team? And constantly playing back and making sure that you've got a truly good understanding. Something I also think is very important where possible is to actually go to the extent of defining these. And I think this can be really powerful, particularly when you're implementing Salesforce for an organization that hasn't used it before, where you actually define within like some documentation that you provide about what is a lead in Salesforce, what is an opportunity, what is a campaign, like what information is required of that, any other terminology in the that's system specific, but then also layering on the business terminology. So maybe the stages that they use, or the way that they qualify those leads, or any other terms that are used, so that that everybody can go somewhere and have a clear understanding. But also it means that when people start, they also can go somewhere where they can really get up to speed with the organization's terminology. And then in practical terms, just for setting up the system, it's just really important to be consistent with the terms and the languages that you're using in fields, across help text, in messaging. So any warning messages that you put up in validation, or any instructions that you put up in screen flows, so that you're always using the correct terms. So this can be particularly important if for any reason an organization has tried to rename any of the functionality in Salesforce. So although I would always, if when someone comes to me and says, oh, we want to rename this tab or something like that, I always try to be clear with the implications of that. So which can be that although it can, the name can change in most cases, it's not necessarily all. Plus, it doesn't change in some of the system setup in the background, which can cause, it just takes a little bit of extra time for people that are working on the system. And then that terminology can creep into different places, both in the user interface and in the system setup, particularly if the people that are working on the org are not as familiar with the name change and all of those sort of things. So again, terminology comes up time and time again when I've worked with sales customers and companies or implementing Sales Cloud. So getting visible buy-in from sales leaders, also very important. Now, this is going to be important across any implementation, but particularly when it comes to sales, I find that it's important because when that implementation, one of the primary drivers for putting in Sales Cloud can be that leaders want to get greater visibility of the opportunities and the sales that are going on in their organization, so that they can produce a more accurate forecasting, which allows for better business planning. So that's a really important area. So there is a strong win for leaders in terms of how they do that, but it can, the value can be slightly harder to translate to users who, if they weren't using a centralized system, had a lot of autonomy to work in whichever way that they wanted, and therefore, or bringing everything into a standardized system means that, one, they might have to adapt the way they work, two, they have to enter more information, and things are more visible and have the potential to be scrutinized. So it's really important that leaders show that they value that people are taking the time to fill in the information in the system. And when I say leading by example, there's one element of, talking within the business and to people about why it's important, but I think it's also really important that people see them in the system and using it. And as I say, it can be a big change for sales teams, and you don't get the value from Sales Cloud or any CRM system unless people are actively using it, they're putting in good quality data, and they're keeping it up to date. And sales leaders can have a real impact in that by making sure that people can see that they're using the information, that they value the information, and that it is delivering on the requirements and the problems that it was brought in to solve. So how can you see when, or be aware of causes or signs that this is or isn't happening? So if sales leaders aren't logging in, and I've definitely been in a situation where that's happened before, even though for me it was a surprise at the time. Sales leaders aren't using the dashboards and the reporting functionality. Now, in most cases, that's one of the driving reasons why the system has been brought in the first place. But there are situations where the leaders aren't actually interested in the reporting in the system, and actually they're asking for spreadsheets to be exported, and they're working with their forecasting in the way that they always used to. Again, if a user is asked to provide data in a spreadsheet, then it devalues the the reason for using the system in the first place, because they could just be using their spreadsheet as a shadow system. And if nobody's in Salesforce looking at how the data aggregates up, then nobody actually notices. It can cause low adoption, because if some of the activities of logging data and keeping things up to date can be an additional admin task, and if nobody's looking and nobody's using the data, then people will quickly realize that they can get away without doing it or using it, and then will stop, and adoption will be low and the success will not have realized. And in some cases, leaders just don't appreciate just quite how much they're being able to see them as a physical presence in the system makes a difference. So it's important just to communicate that. So, for example, if you're an organization where you're using Chatter, then you would want to see, both leadership and users using that functionality and within the system. Or if leaders are visiting customers or being part of those, then you would expect that also would be recorded within the system. It's not just for those that are doing the work day in, day out. So in practice, how can you encourage this or make it seen as visible? Well, I'm pretty sure everybody on here will have heard the term, if it's not in Salesforce, it doesn't exist. So that is about making sure that there aren't any shadow systems, there aren't any spreadsheets making their way around an organization with information that isn't already in Salesforce. Another key one is actually running sales meetings based on Salesforce data. So that might be on the dashboards, bringing that up and asking users to, if the information isn't in there, to ask them to update it live in the system so everybody can see it come up and see the records moving through their process and being populated and see the value in that. Leadership having dashboards, so they might be visible to everyone or just people within the leadership team, but for those to be regularly viewed, to be refreshed, to those to be meaningful and feed into business planning. I haven't specifically written it on here, but it might be using the forecast functionality within Sales Cloud, if that is indeed something an organization is doing. It might be making sure that leaders can access Salesforce on their mobile phone. Often sales leaders are out and about, they're traveling, they're visiting sales teams in lots of different regions. So being able to access the system whilst on the move is important, to be able to drill down into key information about where they can help move deals or understand their forecast while they're on the move is important. And another thing could be around providing some coaching for leaders. So, it might not be in the same formal training that you might do for users, but, what extra steps or activities or actions could you encourage leadership to do that makes them appear visible in the system, make sure that they get value from it, but also means that other users can see how they're leading by example. And then the next one is that user experience matters. So again, I've mentioned it a couple of times. When I think about sales users, they really, any time that is spent entering data into a system is not time spent with customers and making connections and providing information about benefits and building those relationships with customers. So in this case, creating a quality user experience which reduces as much friction as possible for people to use the system gives you the strongest option to make sure that the data in there is good. And by that, I mean up to date, and that there is a volume of it which allows the business to make decisions. And this is only becoming increasingly important when we look at AI, because the more data points that we have within the system will allow like models to understand what good looks like, and then be able to provide informed prompts about how further things can be improved or actions that can be taken. But it relies on data to be added, but nobody wants a member of their sales team to be sat in front of a desk just keying in information. So in this case, creating a really good user experience, which has sort of the minimum effort and is efficient as possible, is really important. So causes and signs here include information not being updated or entered in the first place, users not logging in, long unfocused page layouts, that sort of thing. So you, even at a very basic level, you can go in and look at an environment and see that there are lots of fields on the page. It's difficult to understand which ones to fill in at what times. You have to tab to many different screens to find information, all of those sort of things. And again, rekeying data can cause is additional time that people that could be spent actually connecting and building relationships with customers or potential customers. So there are a number of things that we can also do in this area about experience. So understanding what data is required when, and getting really into the detail to craft a fine balance between what information can we get people to put into the system, but at what time is it appropriate. So it can be very easy to be like, oh well, during the sales process all of this information is required, or these key fields are required, and then make them required very early on in the process, but they might not be relevant until maybe the contracting phase, or later on in a procurement phase. And therefore it causes restrictions and friction for the user, which means that then the information just either the opportunities don't get moved on, or incorrect or dummy data is put in, which is worse, because you wouldn't want that training your AI models. There are lots of things that have ways that Salesforce are trying to address this themselves now, about bringing information from different places into one single screen where people can take action. So those, you'll have recently seen the inspection views. And then we've also got dynamic forms. I've recently been working with these and presenting information from different records on different tabs to really make that user experience much easier, so that I'm, as best possible, trying to meet people where they are. So present the information when and at the time and in the record that they're actually needing it. As I highlighted with leaders, understanding the devices people need to use is also important. So things can be crafted for that. Involving users early, getting feedback. Does this work? Does it not? Can we simplify this? Do we need all of this information? What could we automate out of this? And another very simple one is connecting emails. So we've got Einstein Activity Capture or other tools which automate the bringing in of emails or tasks. You can integrate Salesforce Sales Cloud with Calendly, all of those sort of tools, in order to mean that people don't have to manually key data. And then the next one I would say is be discerning about rules and processes. So what do I mean by this? So I mean, coach business stakeholders on the pros and cons of making data required, and things like automatically generating emails and tasks for notification. And why is that important? Well, so I've definitely been in some implementations where initially the business were really excited about getting in this Sales Cloud system. It can automate things. I know we'll create these notifications. So if this happens, then we'll set a task for someone, or if this happens, we'll send them an email. And actually, in a few cases, we've put that information in, and then by the time within like a month, we've been asked to turn it back off again because it just created too much noise. And the same goes for rules. So again, an organization can be really excited about how they can improve their data quality. They're going to put in these rules. Everybody's going to fill in this information. It's going to be really great. And then when they've practically used it, they've found that actually interrupts users' flow and working with the system, and it's been a bit clunky. So we're asked to sort of turn a lot of the things off, and actually people are trusted to enter the system because they understand. And it's been more about communicating the reason why they need to enter it, which has been powerful. So we see this when leaders are requesting a lot of mandatory information. The system is generating a lot of tasks, but they're not being closed or set to completed. They're just sitting there. They're getting in the way. They're noise. Users complain that they're just getting way too many emails to be able to manage. And some of the things that you can do in practice here is actually, if you're asked to make data required generally through a validation rule, then really sort of hone in on specifically when it's required and try and make those rules so that they take into account where it might be in terms of a stage or the type of opportunity it might be, all of those sorts of things. Start with only an essential set of rules. Now, this depends on your project and the approach with the organization and all of those sort of things. But my go-to now is to create like the essential baseline with the plan to then review that maybe shortly after the system has been in use to see what works, what doesn't work, what else we might add to that. And it's also important to have a channel for user feedback so that people can quickly highlight if there is a problem or if something is actually making them less efficient than they were to start with, and that can be resolved quickly. And then this would be the last one. So this is about confirming the decision-making process. And by this, I mean clarity on who makes the decisions and a time frame. So this I've often seen that one of the reasons that you can have delays on actually building or releasing functionality is because there is a particularly thorny process or issue within the system where someone needs to make decisions on like classifications or process stages or redefine what happens in those. And the person that is building or designing the system is poised to understand specifically what that requirement is, but the decision is difficult to make because it's not clear who really owns it within the organization. It might affect multiple teams, and there might be some misalignment on what they need from that. And if they haven't been working both in the same system before, they've been able to, maintain their different stages or their different definitions outside of the system. So causes for this or signs that you can see it happening are when business units merge, particularly if they're in different countries with units like have been able to act autonomously before and are trying to come into the system, and there needs to be some flexibility on both sides to be able to meet their requirements. There's repeat discussion about the same things, so you'll look to have a decision or a discussion about a particular topic, but it gets moved on to the next meeting, and then a couple of days or a week passes or a couple of weeks passes and nothing's really moved, and the same people are having the same discussion. Or business users just can't actually tell you who decides, and that also can happen. So in practice, how can you try to mitigate against this? So identify process steps or classifications as early as you can, so that you can highlight these and get business agreement and start that process off as early as possible. And also be very conscious of when maybe a team or a process is going to merge. So the piece of functionality or the capability that you're putting in is bringing multiple teams together, or it's consolidating processes that have been, running in parallel into one. So another key area. So hopefully that's given you a few tips about things that might have, that you might find useful or might be able to apply across your projects. I hope that a lot of them are actually relevant to implementing functionality beyond just Sales Cloud, but these are some key ones that I am always looking out for now when I'm working with a organization or as part of a project team, looking for where those points are where we could slightly drift, because they can either cause delays, or they can mean that you don't quite deliver on the expectation of the users that you're working for. So thank you very much for your time today. We'll move into a section now on questions. If you want to get in touch, the best place to get in touch with me is on LinkedIn, and I have included a link to the book below, where it's framed as the full application lifecycle. So you talk about setting up for success, then understanding some of the functional areas within Sales Cloud, the build and design, and then all the way through the process, so that it's a sort of single resource, effectively something that I wish I'd had when I started.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Kerry, for delivering that. Everyone, if you please pop your questions down, questions, comments, thoughts, that would be great. We do have one, which is, so during this session, you have provided learnings from working with organization to build Sales Cloud solutions, but I was wondering what your thoughts are on some of the newer Sales Cloud functionality.
Okay. Yeah, no. So I think, so there was a period of time where I probably said that some of the functionality in Sales Cloud didn't change that much, but I think we've seen in specifically the last year or couple of years, we've seen some sort of what I think is quite nice functionality. So the inspection views, I think pipeline inspection has been widely viewed very positively. So that's an area within Sales Cloud now where you can view all your opportunities, but it also allows you to see how they've changed over time, which again is something that sales leaders are always asking for. Like, what value of my pipeline has moved in or out over a time frame? Have these opportunities been pushed? Like, have they moved from 1 month to the next? Is there an opportunity that's just hanging around for like 6 months because it's just moved from 1 month to another? And it also allows you to get a snapshot of the activity information all in one view. So that's really powerful. In this recent summer release, they've released a way of called the buyer relationship map, where you can actually create some attributes which include and see people that are involved in the buying unit on a map, which I think is really powerful, and something that standard Sales Cloud hasn't necessarily had a great way of visualizing that. So within that, you can put in information about whether what role they play, and even mark some people as a detractor, so you can see do you have a full understanding of all the people that might be involved and their influence on that their overall buying decision. So that's really powerful, I think. And then there's also some functionality around preparing for meetings, and they've also brought in the seller home. So at the moment, that's not particularly configurable, but I have no insight. But I'm hoping that again they'll continue to build on that functionality so it becomes more customizable for each organization. So I think it's been quite an interesting and powerful time, and that's before we even start talking about AI, right? So that's a big old topic on its own.
Amazing. Thank you. We do have another question, which is how to prepare for an info gathering meeting.
Yeah, so I would say, so the sort of things that I particularly heavily look into. So, I mean, I think it's really important to find out what is available in advance, right? So there might be, obviously, you want to go in and gather information, but what documents are already available, process diagrams, having a good understanding of all the people that are going to be in the room and get as much information about their um, the roles that they have, the locations that they might be in. Again, if you're working with an international team, it's not so much location, but the fact that they work in different teams, which might have different cultural differences, which can be important about how the dynamic with them and their how they sell in those markets. And so being across as much information as possible, I think is important to have an understanding view, and particularly be key on the terminology that the organization use. Be very clear on what terms you may you may have an understanding with of, but you would want to clarify for that particular organization or that particular team um, what they mean, so that you go in as prepared as possible, and then take all of that information, make no assumptions, and then get people to replay it for you or play back your understanding through that. So if it's information gathering about, say, a process, then you might start with that process framework, right? So this is what like you would play back what you currently understand in the basic sort of form, and then get people to layer on information on top of that, and then possibly even go over things that you already think that you understand from the documentation to clarify that understanding, and then always replaying back, asking more probing questions, gathering detail, and you'll quickly find out where the points are where there might be a slight disagreement or a difference in interpretation of what's important. I think also with when you're doing any sort of requirements gathering or information gathering, it's good to let people have a point where they start at that and they tell everyone in the group what's important to them, because people lead with what's important to them. So even though they might not tell, like specifically list that, or they might have told you what's important, but then if they start talking about something else, then they're telling you something by not directly telling you. So there's a lot that you can pick up from that, but I would typically prepare as much as possible, have a structure to the meeting, but not so structured that you're leading the conversation through just to apply to work through really with confirmation biases, like, because if they don't fully agree or they do want something different, it will come out in the end. It's just at what point in the process. Hopefully that's provided some useful information. If there was more or a variation on that, I can attempt to answer that.
Amazing. Thank you. Are there any more questions for Kerry whilst we have her? Fab. Well, if there are no more questions, and if you're happy to, I think I'll wrap up the session now.
Cool.
Fab. Well, a huge thank you to you, Kerry, for leading a fantastic session, but also a huge thank you to everyone in our audience for tuning in today, for your participation. It was great to hear where everyone was tuning in from, but also for your questions as well. Before we wrap up, Kerry, do you have any final thoughts to share with our audience?
I mean, I'm grateful that people have stayed on, and I hope that this was helpful. I think that There are lots of great resources out there also on Salesforce Ben, but if you are not familiar with London's Calling, then do check out that event because all of our sessions are on YouTube. So after the event, they're all on there. So there's some great content, and if you can't make that, then get in touch with your local community group and get involved in that, because you'll find lots of people who are enthusiastic about what they've learned and want to share and help others. So I wish you a very productive and happy Salesforcing.
Happy Salesforcing. Amazing. Thank you so much, Kerry. Once again, thanks to everyone in our audience. I can see some thank yous coming through as well. So I hope you all have a wonderful rest of the day and hopefully see you soon at our next LinkedIn Live.
Cool. Wonderful. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.